Hey, welcome to the Cam and Otis show. Today, I have a good friend of mine, Pete Turner, Pete A. Turner, on the show with us. Don't ever want to forget that A, because that is a special A.
Yes.
To ask him what that A stands for. Pete's I like to call him a podcast guru.
Nice.
He's my go-to guy if I have any questions, and if anybody has any questions on podcast, he's the guy to go to. He's got a great show called the Break It Down Show. Over 500 shows. I think you're probably approaching about 520, maybe even by now. The way
530.
530. Oh my gosh. Yeah, you crank them out, brother. It's and they're great shows. Every one of them is entertaining and educational. I get bits and pieces from what kind of swimsuit to wear to how to work out and swim better. So
Yes.
the great Break It Down shows are great, and I'm excited to have Pete on the show. And it'll be fun because with Cam's point of view on things, and us old guys, we'll have to really dive into it. So thanks, and welcome to the show, Pete.
Well, it's my honor to be on. I mean, anytime I can get on someone else's air, I think it's so great to be able to create with somebody else. So I appreciate you fellas having me on.
Definitely.
Awesome.
And thank you for being here. So I think a great area to start off, and this is one of our first episodes, we dove into, leadership is leadership, and about how leadership kind of permeates through all these different barriers. Ooh, that's a $10 word right there at 8 in the morning. And leadership permeates through all these barriers, and it can be used in many different areas of life. So I want to ask you just real quick first, how do you define leadership?
Honestly, from my experience, I define leadership by getting in line behind the leader's vision and pushing as hard as I fucking can.
Oh, I love that. I know that's something it takes a lot of people some time to realize, but sometimes the best leader in the group is the first follower. And
Yeah,
I think that's
and if I'm in charge, let's just flip the whole organizational chart upside down. And Otis, you've run teams before. Same thing. Like, here's the vision. Now I'm going to provision you guys with everything you need if I'm the guy who's the actual boss. So I'm just going to get in, and I'm going to be a snowplow as hard as I can to either get behind someone else's vision or get behind my guys as they fulfill my vision. That's how I see it.
So there's this great video on YouTube, and I can't remember the name of it now, but it's how to be a true leader. And it's a picture of this guy that they're at this outdoor concert, and there's this one guy doing this really wacko weird dance out there in the field by himself, and he's just flailing around and doing all these weird sort of moves. And what they're talking about, what the guy who's narrating the video, and I think it was actually a TED Talk now that I think about it, what he talks about is who the real leader is. Is it this guy who's doing the oddball stuff, or is it the first follower? And really, when you start to watch what happens in this crowd and how this movement, how this one weirdo becomes a movement, is the secret to it is that first follower. That first follower, the guy who commits to, this looks interesting, let me lead in. And as soon as that first guy comes, then you watch the time difference, and it's like, bang, more people, and it just becomes exponential. And the next thing you know, there's several hundred people doing this flailing dance out there in the field. And it all goes back to what you were just saying, Pete. It's that good follower who really sets the tone to lead and be successful.
Yeah, I mean, you guys are rugby guys. The scrum is better when everybody's doing 90%. It's one guy can't withstand 10 guys all leaning on a problem. It just doesn't happen. And if it does, it's a freak. And you get right back to it. And those 10 guys doing 90%, they'll always get there, because that's just how it works. I was thinking about the UN. I can't remember his name. He was a Korean guy. I think he took over after Kofi Annan. He said, "I tried to lead by example, but nobody followed." Mm-hmm. Well, there you go.
I think that's a great touch there. And actually, Dad, you mentioned that video. I'm pretty sure that Dr. Torres showed us that in his leadership class. which is where I kind of wanted to connect to this. Was we had a very open-ended, it's a leadership class, coaching, all that kind of stuff. We had to get together as a group and perform a community project. Can't get much more vague than that.
Right.
And, you can go into that with the perspective that like, okay, well, I love rugby. Now I work with a nonprofit and helps underprivileged youth down here to play rugby. I could have driven that home and, I'm sure the group would have followed me to it. But instead you let someone else get the ideas going and you just push behind their idea. And that's really what the leadership needed in that scenario to get the project moving forward.
Yeah. And I guess the thing I would say, and this is the biggest thing I learned in all my time in combat zones, and there's a lot of that time and a lot of wisdom that comes through, but this was the main thing. We're there to create stability in Iraq or Afghanistan. In this case, it's Afghanistan. And the Afghan governmental leader in the area says there's only room for one sword in the scabbard. And this is that whole thing. We're like, okay, this is the guy. He's the one that's going to lead. Let's find out. And get this, I asked him for his plan, and he had one. And it didn't involve the U.S. paying for everything and doing everything. So and it was great because, so again, here is again the leader, the American leader, the battalion commander, an infantry commander, like the guy who is the most will-imposing this guy around. He said, fantastic. Let's get behind this guy's vision. So here you have another leader who's like, yeah, we'll be the scabbard. What do you need from us? Nothing. We'll do nothing better than anybody, So that's, and we had a lot of, at least temporary success in that region because of that philosophy of saying, we're glad to be the scabbard. We'll be the best scabbard we can be. And if it's just doing nothing, then that's what we're going
to. Yeah, that's perfect. And it's, Jesus, so unusual for things like that to happen. I mean, goodness, I think back to all my interactions and all the places that I've been where we're doing that stabilization, nation building. And that was a rare occasion when you had a commander that recognized it wasn't their job to be the heavy arm and, lead from the front with the American flag. It was their job to prop up and sustain and enable the local leaders. So yeah, that's pretty cool. I didn't know what area was that?
That was in Mazan, which is in Zabul province, which is like south central Afghanistan.
Yeah. Okay. Fairly calm area too, if I remember right. It wasn't.
Well, I think it depended on the time when you were there. I mean, it is the home of Mullah Omar. It's Taliban central, but you're right. It's a little sleepy at times, but in only the most deadly way. We had all of the things happen with us. So, I mean, it's southern Afghanistan. You can have a bad day anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah. Well, I want to shift it just a little bit. And one of the things I've been thinking about, because like I mentioned, listening to your podcast and chatting with you, what's that one spy skill that you have that you learned and you still apply that works, that you use like on a daily basis with your podcast?
Oh, see, I thought you were going to take that to a bar trick area.
It's a really good question because there's a lot of them and they're so transparent because, I've done this a lot, but I genuinely care about and like the people that I interact with, so I come from a place of honesty and I had to, because I'm going to a place, when you're doing spy work, you have to build trust, and the people that I'm working with don't extend trust lightly. And so I had to learn how to slowly meter in the trust, low risk trust, medium risk trust, and then extend on credit all of this trust to get to the point where I actually had it and we didn't have to ask for anything. It was a mutual reciprocal agreement and relationship where we were able to do things. And the podcasting world's the same thing. I don't ask for too much. I extend trust and sometimes you don't get paid back, but it's fine. The costs here are a lot lower than they are over there.
Yeah, but you know what, brother? Karma comes around.
Yeah. Well, and I'm genuine, right? Like, people are willing to give me a little low risk trust because I'm smiling. I'm actually enjoying it. I'm curious about who they are. One of my favorite questions in Iraq to ask was Shunu Rayak. What's your opinion?
You know what? Nobody asked them that. That's an awesome
Right.
question.
Yeah. Yeah. And then I would explore their opinion and I would find out fascinating things. So yeah, just taking the time not to ask them where the threat was. And that's how I built my network. And it was powerful because I didn't focus on the negative all the time. I focused on who they were, where they were at, what was important to them.
Yeah.
I think that
go ahead, Cam.
I think that touches on so much as far as leadership and communication goes, because it's really all about understanding the whole picture that you're looking at, whatever situation you're in. If you're only looking at the threats, you're only looking at the negative side of the situation, then you're not going to truly understand where that's coming from. You might be able to have a solution there, but that's a Band-Aid fix. That's not a true fix to the problem. You have to look at the entire picture to be able to understand that true fix to the problem.
Yeah. And we talked about it in terms of liminal space on some of the teams that I was on, where I have to be able to enter someone else's reality and accept it. It doesn't mean it's comfortable. Doesn't mean I agree with it or cotton what they're doing. But the reality is that is their reality. And then I've got to come back into the military reality and translate that in a way that makes sense for them so they don't overreact. And they're not going to like what they hear. So when it comes to stability operations, these things are really hard to do. And if we just come from our perspective the whole time, then I built a rule for that. And I would tell commanders all the time, unless we can find the stability that you think you're creating, we're creating instability. So we're a net destabilizer the moment we show up. I mean, we're at the worst, scariest biker gang of all time. Don't tell me we create stability when we show up at everybody's house, eat all their food, and we have a bunch of guns. That just doesn't work that way.
So I actually have a good question off of that, and I'm not sure this might just be a real quick answer from y'all, but when you're going through that military decision-making process, right, MDMP?
Got it. You got it. You've heard it enough.
Hey, there we go. So as you're going through that, do you have that null option that if we do nothing? Because I know in business and economics, that's something you usually look at is if you don't, if we don't install this mechanism or whatever we're looking at, what will happen? And is that null option better or worse than what we're looking at here? Is that something I'll go through?
It's a great question. So one of the things at the peak of what I was doing, brigade commander pointed at my partner and I and said, these guys are going to get up and talk. This is before his own staff meeting, updating everybody. And when they do, I want you to listen because they're going to tell us to do less stuff. I don't want to pile this shit in the middle of the room that we got wrong. I want 2 or 3 things that we got right. And I want to build off of that. Mm-hmm. So yes, the null value. And then the MDMP thing is important. I want to spend a second there because that's how culture works, right? So if you don't understand your partner's goals or their cultural decision-making process, and that's by design to sound like MDMP because military people understand acronyms. So if your cultural decision-making process and your military decision-making process aren't in alignment with your partners, and you don't understand their goals, you'll get a value that's either going to be corruption, passive-aggressive behavior, or incompetence. And when you hear those things coming through as a leader, you hear your people saying, you just won't do what I tell them to do. That's your clue that you've got a cultural problem, and you can deal with those.
I think you hit on something there too. It's the ability to listen. And one of the things that I saw that the military made so many mistakes with, and I say that in a writ large sort of way,
sure, was the
understanding of the culture. And this has always been one of my pet peeves since the first time I stepped into the box in Haiti, as an SF team leader, was being able to understand the culture of the people that you're working around and working with, and then not trying to put them into the stars and stripes box, and understanding that they may want democracy, but it's not going to look like our democracy.
Mm-hmm. Sure isn't. Yeah.
And that's what's great about democracy, right? I mean, to go into a bigger sense of it, it is establishing a government representative of the people and so it represents the people.
Yeah.
I mean,
yeah. It's in the word. It's in the Republic too. They have the same root. One's Latin, one's Greek, right? Like the demos, that's us, the greater body, and then kratia is power. So the people have the power, and it's the same thing with res publica. It's the same thing. The public have the power, and if they choose to have this kind of a democracy, it turns out ours has evavolved too. Women used to be able to vote. We used to enslave people. you know. But we don't do those things anymore because the public has changed that. So we have to determine what their version of democracy is, and let them foster that, and that can be their starting point.
You know, I wanted to step off from that. Dad, I know you and I have talked about this before, and it's something that really got me into economics a lot, was development economics. And I see a lot of parallels in development economics to a lot of the things that I hear you all talk about with the military, nation building, if you will. Then one of the fundamental aspects that you use in development economics is asset-based community development, ABCD. And that's going in and looking at what they have and figuring out how to develop an economy out of it, rather than going in and saying, hey, what if we ship them a bunch of wood? Then they can start, manufacturing things and go from there. They could build all of our cabinets. But that's not what you're looking at there. You go in and say, hey, they have these natural resources, they have these skills, and build it up from there. And I think that's really what y'all were talking about when you're talking about instilling that democracy. Is it's their democracy still, it's their economy still. You're just coming in to give them the helping hand to build it up the way they want it.
Yeah, it's dangerous though, right? I mean, like that is a good approach, but I think there's at least 2 layers below that approach. So there's boots on the ground, right? But the boots on the ground are dumb. It's great to have them there. And this is even your dad and his peers, like they come there, and if they ignore the ground truth and they're just there, they're going to lose. They're not going to be able to do their job. So you have to understand what's possible there. So yeah, you can go do an assessment and say, okay, what these guys need is, okay, so we did this thing in Afghanistan, and the agricultural teams are a good example of this. They would go there and try to improve the condition of farmers without knowing the condition of farmers. They didn't know the market chain from like
pineapples. That's what I remember.
Pineapples shows up in a palm bottle in Orange County where I live. They didn't know that chain, but they wanted to fuck with it. So yeah, you can look around and see resources, but until you go there and shut your damn mouth and learn what it is that's possible for them, like, hey, we're going to start a co-op around here. Oh, by the way, they already have one. They all cooperate, and they rent a giant truck, and they put their pomegranates in it. Mm-hmm. So yeah, you have to be willing to shut up, gather perspective, and then act small. The smaller you can get, the easier it's going to be to stack wins. If you get too big, and it's so easy to get big, you'll overwhelm that system with your own need to succeed, and you'll lose the rest of the populace in an instant.
Mm-hmm. So what I'd like to do, let's flip this. So we've been talking big nation building pictures, and what's really what I really like about this kind of discussion is you can flip this and you can put this on your team. You can put this into, you just took over a team, you just got promoted, or you've been working with the same team for years, and now you want to make a change, you want to leave. These processes that we've been talking about, what Pete was just talking about, just that shut up and listen, is such a critical skill, because how do you know as a leader what needs to change? Just because you show up and you're the boss, and you say these things have to go, and this is the way we're going to do it from here on out, I don't care what's been happening before, throw it all out the window. Good luck. Good luck with, getting buy-in from your team, and being a true change leader, because what's going to change is who's in charge of that team.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good point. The leadership aspect of trying to, so one of the things I had the advantage of seeing is I saw unit after unit rotate in over the top of my position. And, they would come in, and the other unit before would work their hearts out trying to pass their legacy on and conserve it and preserve it to the next unit. And the next unit was bound and determined to not do what the last unit did. And so it's like I just saw it over and over again, completely unprepared for this change. Even though they thought they were doing a great handoff, you would say, okay, now that you guys realize that the last unit struggled with this, can we advance this thing? Or they would say, I've got the greatest idea. And this is always my example. I see a brown hand grabbing a white hand on a PowerPoint, and we're going to share, and it's like, please, I've got 7 of those slides from the last 7 units. Yeah. Let's do the white hand, brown hand thing. But why are we doing it again? What's going to be different this time?
Mm. Yeah, you just reminded me. I was in a similar position in one of my times in Iraq, and it was 5th Special Forces Group and 10th Special Forces Group. and you'd think that it was the Soviets and the U.S. in the Cold War, because when fifth group rotated out and 10th group came in, and I remember my friend Ken Tovo was the group commander. Fifth group took all their hard drives with them.
Oh my gosh.
They took all the data with them so that they could prepare for the next rotation. I mean, that understand, got that makes sense. But it was that exact same thing that you just said that you watched and saw. It's like, no, this is our information. These are our sources. These are our plans. And and I'm not saying the 10th group didn't do the same damn thing. I just wasn't there when they came.
Everybody did it. I'll confirm it for you. All the groups, all the teams, all the brigades. I got to the point where we would get an RFI because I was there. Like, hey, how many schools are in this valley? I'm like, who's asking the question? Oh, it's the governor's partner. Okay, that's an RFI for the governor. You ask him how many schools there are in the valley. We're tired of answering the question. Ultimately, the answer is we don't know. We can't go far enough out into the valley to confirm it. Go ask your partner. He's the guy that has the information you want. And why are we still chasing this information 15 years later? But we are.
So let's take that and let's take that into another thing that I love to do, because it drove me crazy in the Army, is what's the true lesson learned there? I mean, really, and then how do we apply it to, that was fighting a war and bad guys and good guys and people in between and all that sort of stuff. So, but how do we apply that now in real life and business, and how we move forward with that?
Well, I mean, I look at it from a point of view of culture, right? And so when a CEO or any kind of division chief has an outcome, they've got an idea of what their culture is in their section of the business, and they want to have given outcomes. But unless someone's on the ground level reporting back what they can find, you should be prepared for not getting what you think you're getting out of your people, out of your product, out of the customer experience. Because there's a thing in organizations where I call the accountability ladder, where everybody's climbing on this ladder trying to go up, and they're all looking up at the person above them. So everyone's looking at everyone else's ass, and no one's paying attention on the ground. Like, if you ever hear a business talk about stakeholders, first off, they don't define the stakeholders and what it takes to be a stakeholder. It's just a word that they say. And so I always want to raise my hand and say, what about your customer? Are they a stakeholder? And they're like, no, of course not. Like, okay, well, I'll raise my hand again. Like, don't they have a say in what happens? Like, the enemy always gets a vote, and if the customer is the enemy, then I know they get the vote. Why is the customer the enemy? Why wouldn't they be a stakeholder?
Yeah, I mean, stakeholders, that's gets into that project management stuff, and it's anybody that has an interest in it. And for when an organization doesn't recognize who the leaders are and who has an interest in what they're trying to accomplish, then their probability of success starts to go way down.
Well, and you borrow in new problems too. I'll give you an example. The other day, where I'm from, and this happens all over the nation, the high school that's a mile from my house, they were going to do, and they didn't want to call it an active shooter drill, so they made some kind of other name up. But they were going to have a drill, and so they sent out this email to all the parents saying, if you hear sirens and explosions and all these things, it's because we're doing some, active situation training. But what they don't do, as a norm, the chief of police, the fire department, the emergency manager on site, they never invite a cadre of parents to witness this badass training. It's just scary and mysterious and closed off. And so what you end up with is a bunch of questions and assumptions from the parental populace. And that always builds the specter, and the specter is way bigger than the problem ever really is. But that's an example right there. Like, you think you're doing this training that's going to accomplish X, but it really accomplishes X plus Y plus Z plus alpha, and all these other outcomes that you're not accounting for because you haven't included the stakeholders that are right there in front of your face.
Right. It all goes back to just not looking at the whole picture and not understanding everything in front of you.
Yeah. I mean, think about it. If, Otis, you're a parent. Like, if a chief of police called and said, hey, Mr. McGregor, I would love for you to come down and witness some of our training. I know that I know you're a member of the community and you coach some of the rugby teams. It'd be really great to have you come down. Would you do me the honor of being my guest?
Oh yeah, sure,
Yeah.
definitely.
Have you ever been invited like that? No,
No,
it doesn't happen.
no, and that's another thing that's a leader responsibility. What's the second and third order effects of the decision I make? What does that do to my organization tomorrow, next week, next year? What does it do to the opportunities we'll have? You have to take those things into account as a leader, because that's your responsibility. I mean, it really is. As a leader, you have to understand those things.
I deal in a world, and we all do, especially those chiefs of police. I mean, it's hard to get the populace to trust the police in a way that the chief of police would intend, right? I mean, there's some people that just out and out trust the police, but there's a lot of people that don't, and rightfully so. They're the one institution that can take your freedom from you, whether they're right or wrong. So affect always leads effect.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can't, an affect, when you look at it as a noun, it's a response to stimuli. So you're going to go out and you're going to give out tickets for good driving and reward people. Well, if you don't measure that affect, it's just effect. I can write 100 love letters to a girl and doesn't mean she's going to love me. So you have to think about affect, and that's why you invite people to participate, so you can start to understand the emotional response to your actions, because if they're out of whack, now you have something you can work with.
I think that all goes back to, fighting that information asymmetry. It's all about one party knowing something that the other party doesn't. And that's what leads to that confusion, that misperception of the other party. There's all sorts of different examples of this. One that came to mind earlier, I think, is the general contractor joke of every single general contractor that's going to come out and look at your deck is going to think that the previous general contractor is an absolute idiot who must have had something personally against you to do this terrible job on your deck. But really what's going on there is you don't know what the hell he's talking about, and he does, and that's it. You have the same thing with realtors. That's the reason we have to hire realtors, is because we don't know anything about the housing market. Same with most people with mechanics. You don't know anything about your car, so you go in and he can rake you over the hot coals because he has all the information and you have nothing there. So I kind of wanted, we've been touching on that. I wanted to see how directly more that goes into your career in the Army, and how you were able to use that information asymmetry. So we've talked about fighting that information asymmetry. How were you able to use it to kind of reverse the formula there?
Well, I mean, the first thing I would do to any unit that I came to new, whether they arrived for me or I arrived to them, is I would look at how they communicated at the staff level. And if I couldn't see a proper accumulation of perspective, of the local perspective, like you would see things like, hey, we're going to go out and paint the government center, and that's going to cause the people to believe in the government. I raised my hand. How can you say that? Like if someone painted your government center, would you even notice? So I'm always looking for that perspective. And then that tells me where the work is, because the boss doesn't have what he needs to make a decision on. So I would literally go out and I would focus on our actions, because we're so powerful as a military. If we can reduce our mistakes by 10%, we're going to have a chance to be a lot more successful. Doesn't mean you're going to be successful, but at least you stop making so many dumb mistakes. So when the agricultural team goes out and says, we're going to build a check dam, and I'm like, what about the guy who runs water in the valley? Have you talked to him? Yeah, he's an idiot. I'm like, oh, okay, well, that's good for the note. So now I'm collecting on us to give that to the commander to say, hey, no one's talked to, like, we literally had a dam, but the locals kept hacking at it because they didn't want it there. And they all said it's gonna wash away in the first big storm, which actually happened. So all of these things were happening, yet we had spent like $250,000 making this thing into something that nobody understood and nobody wanted. So rather than spending a little bit of time and talking to the people, understanding what the guy who's responsible for water in the valley he wasn't a stakeholder in this whole thing. So that's what I would primarily do is go out and look for, these are the things that are keeping us from winning. Yeah, there's threat stuff for sure. Let's go find bad guys. That's relatively simple, and everybody's working on it. In the meanwhile, we're building a dam that's causing disruption. We're building agricultural programs that are removing people further from the government. No one's going to the government for any kind of help. On all these other things, And the commander's got a 4-line operational plan, and it's, build capacity with the local security forces, police, and government. Well, there's one thing that I'm dealing with right there, and all these different things that are part of their stated objectives. So I'm snowplowing that stuff, saying, hey, if we would actually work with these people on the water issue, we might find something smaller and more simple to deal with, and give the governor, some kind of a win, because we got people in Afghanistan to show up to the government and ask the governor for help. How impossible is that?
Yeah. Well, the fact that they even recognized they had a government, that was a huge step right there, let alone ask them for help.
Right.
Now, I want to shift gears, bring it back to the podcast, my podcast guru. Where do you see podcasts at large, the big podcast pictures? Where do you see that going, in the next 5 years or more?
Well, it continues to get bigger and more pervasive. What I see is that radio is going to lose to podcast, or they're going to adopt a more podcast-centric approach, because I can't stand to listen to radio. My default station is the Dodgers flagship station, so it's Sport Talk, and I can't get those guys to shut up faster. I have no time for that. Look, those guys do great work, and I love that they're out there being successful, but it's just empty-headed. It's the same. It's like watching the sitcoms your whole life. At some point, you've seen every sitcom scenario. Mm-hmm. So podcasts can take over that. You can get people that are passionate about the team and talk in a way that's intelligent. And I don't want sports talk all the time. So maybe I want to learn about, some part of history or some part of management or leadership or whatever it's going to be. Those things are going to continue to evolve and develop. And I think, gosh, I hope that we have all the access in the world to all the information, but it doesn't mean we process it better, and it doesn't mean that we gather wisdom. So hopefully we'll get more towards that, where we're gathering wisdom and gathering some consensus so we can get through some of this roadblock that we've got where we just can't get along. I hope that podcasting becomes an aggregator of ideas and positivity so that we can accomplish more things.
I mean, what you just described to me, what the picture that came into my head is a library.
Yeah.
As you were describing it, that's what I started thinking. I was like, there's a gazillion books on leadership, but
yeah,
that one hit me, or marketing or comedy or whatever. And that's, as you were describing it, that's the vision that just popped into my head is a library. It can become a library of stuff I want to listen to, whether it's entertaining or education.
That reminds me a lot of an interview I heard with who's in some hot water again right now, but not to even go into that, just him talking about social media as a whole and how he sees the future of social media. So I think it's a very similar thing, because social media, podcasts, this is all the new generation of information sources, and it's all about how is it going to affect, will they last, what will happen to the old ones, and the very, very similar situations, I think. And I heard a lot of similarities with what you were saying, Pete, with what he was saying, to how it's all about how it's used to a lot of extent. Social media can connect people to all these different groups, and it can do really great things by connecting people who need to be together and, across the country, who are fighting a rare disease. And there's only 200 of them across the whole country. Those people, when they group together on Facebook, that means something. And there's all of these great positives that can come from it, of being more connected with family and friends and all of that. But then on the other side, you can be more connected with bad things. You can shut off all of the bad, and we've seen all the negative sides of social media. And so I think that's kind of where you can see podcasting as well, is you have this parallel to where I like your library parallel, Dad, because it's you starting a podcast, and there's so many different podcasts out there. It's such a plethora of information, but it's all about finding that niche of that group that you want to connect with. And that's really what it comes down to, whether that's 100 people or 100,000 people across the country or even more. It's all about you finding that niche that you're connecting with, just like a book, just like with a TV show.
Yeah, I really see, in terms of like that style of podcast, I've got a turtleneck sweater and a tweed jacket in my library, and I curate an experience for my audience. We do learn about like what swimsuits to wear and how to swim better and actors who do things. I often get told by people who don't have podcasts that I should, like, what's my niche? And I'm like, my niche is life. You know, what's interesting to me. And the more I see people yelling and screaming or calling everybody bigots and racist, the more I'm like, this is perfect, because I'm not going to focus on that. I'm going to focus on tolerance. It's easy to focus on intolerance. Everybody can be intolerant of something, but how can you sit down with someone that you don't necessarily agree with and have a civil, reasonable conversation? Abortion is a great example. There is no high moral ground in abortion. You're either denying a woman, you're forcing a woman to have a baby, or you're killing a baby. There's no, you could talk about the when, but it's still a moral compromise. Oh, and by the way, we've completely excluded male rights from that whole conversation. So there's no perfect answer. It's just, you have to sit down and say, I can take this level of discomfort and go from there. Otherwise, you know, you're just talking about sides in an argument. Everybody's yelling at each other. Nobody wants to join a side where they're just screaming at one another. So yeah, I see podcasting in terms of how I view it for what I do from the fact-based side is how can I create a sexy middle where we can all go, a lot of this sucks, but we can all take it. And we're all able to go in one direction that we all kind of agree on. We can't even agree on who a good president would be.
You know, I think this is great, and I can tie this back around to everything we've been talking about, you know, with the information asymmetry and communication and all that different work that you do. You know, it's really, oh crap, did I just lose that train of thought? Or so it's really all about understanding the full situation there. Everyone's right in their own perspective. And if you can't go into a conversation understanding that, expecting for them to teach you something, you're never going to go anywhere. It doesn't matter what that conversation is about. If you go in thinking that you have the moral high ground and therefore anything that they say, you can't even fathom it, then you're already in the wrong. You know, I had this example of, you know, I was talking with a friend the other day, and he made some, I won't say what specifically politically we were talking about because I don't even remember, but he makes some comment about it. He's like, you know, I just don't understand how someone could think yada, yada, yada. And I was thinking to myself, you just painted yourself into a corner right there, because you said, I don't understand it. Yeah. So you need to find someone, talk to them, figure out where they're coming from. And then all of a sudden it'll start making more sense. You know, if you can't understand people's other perspective, whether it's in a war zone or it's in a, you know, the dinner table at Thanksgiving, if you can't understand their perspective, it's not going to be a good situation. It's going to be combative.
Yeah, if you don't seek to understand, how can you be understood? I mean, I think that's Thomas Aquinas. He's been dead for 500 years. There's a good guy to dig up and study. We always want to dig up people and call them racist and bigots and everything else, but here's a guy that just said 7 simple words, or however many words that was, and it's a guide for anybody. So, you know, seek to understand.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, let me ask you one more question about the show, the Break It Down show. Is where's it going to go? Where do you see it going? I mean, are there any plans for spinoffs, since we talked about sitcoms? You know, is there?
Yeah, I absolutely. I mean, that's
a part show or what?
Yeah, there's for sure. Well, first off, I'm working on a project right now called the Prison Chronicles, where we're examining, you know, in the U.S., nearly every person who gets incarcerated is released, no matter how heinous the crime. Almost all of them get out. So what condition would we want someone walking out of prison if they've done something grisly to another human or humans? You know, do you want them to have nothing? Most prisoners walk out of prison with less than $1,000 in their pocket. Who can transition with $800? Mm-hmm. So we examine this, and it's just based on the actual stories of people that have actually done this stuff and what got them to that point. And if we're going to be better as a society in terms of how we incarcerate people and how we rehabilitate them, then, you know, we're going to do that. So like, that'll be one of the projects that we do. And we'll continue to do these things where I want to examine stories, you know, like the border crisis. I want to examine it in a reasonable, non-political way. Mm-hmm. Understand how many people it would take to handle 125,000 people showing up on your border unannounced, and why a wall might be a good idea to help control that, to provide the care that they need, because that system gets quickly overwhelmed. And I'm not trying to make an argument for the wall. I'm just saying you can now all of a sudden say, yeah, actually controlling that population in a way that makes sense on our side of the thing might be a reasonable solution.
I think that just circle that all the way back around, like we've been talking. That's with that specific example. It's one of those where, if you look at it, there's reasons people are doing things. This is why I subscribe to behavioral economics so much, is everyone's responding to incentives. If you
Yeah.
can't understand the incentives of each person in the situation you're looking at, you have no reason to even be involved making a decision about it. And that's really what you're talking about there, is seeing what those people's incentives are on either side of the situation. And then, what is your incentive to be doing what you're doing every day? And that's all it's about.
Yeah, whatever the immigration answer is, we have a funnel problem, and it gets choked off, and desperate people don't give a fuck about a funnel.
Yep. Very
know?
true.
Yep. Oh yeah. Well, hey, Pete, thank you for your time. We like to wrap the show up with what you learned, and I'll go first this morning. And I learned about republic, racy, publicly.
Yeah,
Public,
res publica. Yeah, whatever.
res publica. There we go. A
Yeah.
Greek word, and wow, that yeah, getting some deep thought and roots of word meaning. Camden.
Well, I'm not sure I'd necessarily learned it, but that's probably something I should learn every single day. And Pete, you said it a different way, which I loved, was the shut up and listen. I call it information asymmetry, and I could throw big words at it all I want. It's shut up and listen. That's all it is. Just shut up and listen.
Pete.
Do I have to go now too?
Yeah, you got to
yeah.
go, man.
Okay. Here's what I learned. There are so many people out there doing this, that are telling these stories that make some sense. And when the times get dark and you get scared of everything, reject the fear, and know that there are more people out there trying to have a reasonable conversation. And I'm just going to keep trying to trust in that. It's hard, but that's what I'm going to try to do. That's what I learned: just keep trusting.
Yes, sir.
Awesome. Thanks. And hey, for follow up, Pete's on the Break It Down show. They're everywhere, and he's got Lions Rock Entertainment. Pete, you want to give a little shout out to either one of those?
Yeah, Break It Down show. You can grab me, P.A. Turner, on all social media. And yeah, I help people do podcasts, business, brands, people, whatever it is. I'm glad to help you and answer questions and just give you some common sense on how to get going and where the hurdles might be, so when you see them, and that it's all right to struggle with them.
I hate to keep us going a little bit more, but at the very beginning, you made a comment about the A being something really important. What does the A stand for?
Dad said it was important. It's just my middle name, man. And there's more than one Pete Turner out there doing creative things. There's a very notable photographer who's passed on, but out of respect to those guys doing their work, I use my middle initial, Adrian A, to let those guys be who they are and let me be who I am.
I was ready for a good joke there or something. I gotta say, I'm a tad
It stands for
disappointed.
asshole, because I
There we go. There's the finish.
That was my thought. I thought, your mother foresaw who you were going to be. Hey, thanks again, Pete, man. It's been great having you on the show, and look forward to catching up with you and listening to more Break It Down shows as we go on.
Thanks, fellas. I really appreciate your time.
Thanks for coming on, Pete.